Hello and welcome to another episode of the Express Economist. But this is not a regular episode, and I will not be talking to any one particular economist this episode. I wanted to take a step back. 2022 is coming to an end, and I wanted to look back at what we could produce for all of you in 2022. We started the show with a particular purpose, and the idea was that for a lot of lay readers in India, economics is very difficult to understand. It's very difficult to understand what's happening in the economy. It's heavily burdened with jargon, and the idea was that I would talk to top economists, but ask them to simplify and ask the questions that you might have in your mind to contextualize what is happening. And through the year, we could put together 32 episodes, and we started off just before the budget, and we've just recorded our last episode. Hopefully you've watched it. But the idea behind this episode is to provide you a quick recap of all that we did. As I speak, you will also find the links to those episodes, so you can pause and watch that episode if you like, or you can go and save that episode. We'll also give you the link to the whole playlist, and you can watch those episodes, because I see that a lot of episodes are there which are very relevant even now, because those themes are sort of coming back again and again. And before I start off with the recap journey, I want to first of all thank all of you, because we got a lot of feedback on this. A lot of readers and viewers enjoyed watching what we produced, and gave us a lot of good pointers. I'm very grateful for that, and I would really urge you all to watch these episodes and tell us what would you like us to do more, who would you like us to talk to, what questions would you like answered, and hopefully in 2023 we'll be able to put together many of those episodes, and bring you more in-depth understanding about the Indian economy and the policy scene. So without any further delay, let's start off with how the journeys of the Express Economist started, how it tracked the developments in the Indian economy right through 2022. Okay, so the first episode that we actually published was in the lead up to the union budget. And this is very relevant because again, this year again, in 2023, we'll have the union budget on the 1st of February, and everybody would be excited about knowing what is it about the union budget that they should bother about. Last year, we talked to Professor Bhanumurthy, who is the Vice Chancellor of Base University, and we talked to him to understand some of the basics that you must understand as even lay readers. For example, why can't we simply print more money? We talk about budget deficits, why can't we simply print more money? And you'll find an episode dedicated on that. We also asked him, why do these deficits matter? Every year you would think that the government is, sort of in a quandary whether to spend money on this scheme or that scheme, cut money here, spend money there. And you could always ask, why does the government do it? And the typical answer is fiscal deficit. Now, so what happens? Why should fiscal deficits be, contained? So we asked him those questions, and you'll find fantastic understanding about those issues. What happens when the government doesn't meet its deficit obligations? How does it adversely affect the economy? You'll find the link to that episode also. I want to throw it up to Professor Bhanumurthy on how does he look at that bigger question. Should the government be spending or not? And then we'll come to the questions of what is fiscal deficit and how important it is, or how strong the recovery process is.
The current year, the first advance estimates is saying that Indian economy should have registered a growth of 9.2%. I think the government needs to spend in a right place.
But immediately after the budget, we also talked to another, very well-known economist, Professor Pranab Sen, who's the former chief statistician of India, and we asked him how to make sense of the budget, and there were many things that we wanted to ask. For example, will the budget reduce the unemployment levels that India was facing? What is the larger thinking of the Modi government? What is the economic ideology of the Modi government? What is happening to, say, capital expenditure, revenue expenditure? What are these things to begin with? And is he hopeful that the economy will turn around? Because remember that this budget was supposed to sort of shoot the economy into the revival mode. India had just about grown by 8-9% last year, and we were hoping that this will trigger a massive recovery. So you'll find the episodes link on the screen, and also hear from Professor.
This budget gives the feeling that the state of the country today is such that help at the individual level is no longer needed, and the help that is needed is at the wider economy sense.
But by late February, you might recall that the condition in Ukraine had become really tense. Russia's invasion in Ukraine had really flared up and really created a whole set of problems for the global economy, including the Indian economy. So what we did was that immediately after that, for the next few weeks, we looked at the impact of what Ukraine will do to the Indian economy. And we first talked to Madan Sabnavis of Bank of Baroda, who's the chief economist in Bank of Baroda. Then we talked to Dr. Joshi, DK Joshi from CRISIL. And we talked to Sergey Lenau of the International Institute of Finance, because we wanted to understand, what is happening to inflation, how will that impact India. We wanted to know what is the likely impact of Ukraine crisis on India's economy. And around that time, a lot of people started saying that India's economy will be hit. Some people even argued that there'll be stagflation. So we explained those terms. What is stagflation? Why are people saying that India is likely to face stagflation? Is it actually true that we are facing stagflation? And you'll find those links. You can go and look at those episodes. You'll get a great in-depth understanding of how to analyze the economy. What are the factors through which India was getting affected at that time when the oil prices were soaring, inflation was high, and we were trying to figure out what to do as an economy, and trying to figure out where the economy will go in the coming year. So the Ukraine crisis, it just kept getting flared up, and that led to massive inflationary surge across the world. And in fact, inflation became the biggest story of 2022. If you look back, if there's one thing that you would look back, you'll say that the Ukraine crisis and its impact on global inflation is the central story that determined everything across the world, including in India. That is the story that dominated. So we did actually some fantastic episodes on understanding inflation, and it's very important to understand where India was when the Ukraine crisis happened. We already had a massive inflation surge in India before Ukraine. And so when the Ukraine crisis happened, the inflation levels went up. So we had an episode with Dr. Auridip Nandi from Nomura Research, whose reports, fantastically, repeatedly told us what was happening to India's inflation scenario and why we should be bothered about it. We also did an episode with Dr. Shamaran Chakraborty, who explained in great detail what happens to the various aspects of the economy, like India, which is a complicated economy. What has happened to exchange rates, to forex reserves, how is inflation sort of changing many of these dynamics, and what does it mean for you and me? What does it mean for the broader economy? Why should we bother? What should we expect from the policymakers as a result of that? One of the big things that happened around this time was this massive fall in rupees exchange rate with the dollar. And many of you might recall that it was heavily politicized again, whether we'll touch 80 or not, what's happening, should rupees exchange rate fall, not fall, should RBI hold back the exchange rate? And we talked to Deepti Deshpande of CRISIL, and in that episode you'll understand what's been happening to the exchange rate, and whether it, is it falling in excess of what it was falling in any particular year, or its long-term average. It's a very detailed interview. Again, you'll understand great deal. have a look at that also. Then around the end of May, we got the data for India's growth rate in the last financial year. And we got to know that India's overall growth rate in the last financial year, that is the financial year that ended in March, we grew at around 9%, 8.7 odd percent, which was fantastic broad number on the whole. But the data also showed that in the last quarter of the financial year, that is between January and March, India's economy grew at just about 4%, which is almost less than half of what the overall year number was. And this was crucial to understand because before going into the pandemic, we were growing at less than 4%. So it appeared as if that as we came out of the pandemic and the base effects were rid, we are going back to something like a 4% growth rate, which is, as many of you might recall, and it's a technical term, it's not a political term, the Hindu rate of growth. It's there used in economic literature. And I caught up with Professor Sudipto Mandal of the Center for Development Studies to understand what has happened to India's growth rate. Are we likely to now slide back to slower growth rates? And we actually put together several episodes right through the year as the GDP data came out to look at the state of India's economy. And in those episodes, you'll find that I've talked to top economists who track these things very minutely, but I've asked them the questions that you want answered. You'll understand what is happening to the economy, and you'll understand how to understand these things. What are the variables to look? You'll understand the implications behind them. So you'll find that, later on we also did an episode on the state of the economy with Professor Pulapre Balakrishnan of Ashoka University. We also did an episode with Dr. C. Rangarajan, who's a former RBI governor and frankly has held lot of positions in the Indian policy making scale. And he gave us a fantastic long interview. It's very rich. I really urge you to watch it. The links are there on the screen. And most recently, we just finished with an episode with Pranjal Bhandari, who's the chief India economist with HSBC, looking ahead, not just looking back at 2022, but also looking ahead of where India's economy is likely to be. We also recorded an episode with Ms. Renu Kohli, who's one of the long time, she's a former IMF staffer and former RBI staffer. And so at that time when the US was raising interest rates, trying to contain its inflation in the wake of the Ukraine crisis, we asked her how that impacts India, how US inflation impacts US economy, and if that creates recession, how does it impact India? Then we also did, apart from hardcore economy interviews, we also looked at many of the other associated issues. For example, we did an episode with Deepa Sinha to understand the whole issue of freebies. Freebies has been massive, Rebdi and freebies. So we asked Deepa, what exactly is a freebie? In economic literature, actually, there is no term like freebie. So what exactly is freebie? How would you designate one policy as a freebie and the other as not a freebie? You should watch that episode. She gives a very, very granular understanding of how to think about freebies. Similarly, we looked at the issue of NREGA, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, and whether it's working in the manner it should work. That episode we did with Professor Amit Basole and Rajendran Narayanan of Azim Premji University. And similarly, we also did an episode on the proposed or the demand for an urban employment guarantee scheme. We did that with Professor Gautam Bhan to understand why is there an increasing demand for urban employment guarantee scheme, and is that a good idea? And I frankly pitched all the counter arguments that one has against any such scheme. And you must listen to that episode. Find it really interesting to understand where are people coming from when they demand an urban employment guarantee scheme. Similarly, we did a bunch of episodes on poverty and unemployment. Now, these are two issues which are really prickly. Often this polarizes the public opinion, but it's very important to understand what is happening. For example, on poverty, World Bank came out with a report which said that 5.6 crore or 56 million people were pushed into poverty in India, extreme poverty in India after the COVID impact. And we had a very detailed interview with Professor Santosh Mehrotra on that issue. And later on, because there was so much debate around poverty and a lot of people believe that India has totally removed all poverty, there is no abject poverty in India, we did an episode with Professor Maitreesh Ghatak of London School of Economics to understand how have different people looked at the issue of poverty, how have they calculated, and you will understand for yourself, and in very simple language you will understand how to actually measure poverty and what is wrong with measuring poverty one way, and what is right in measuring poverty the right other way. You'll figure out for yourself. There'll be links there. You'll understand a fair amount on the whole debate about poverty. Similarly, on employment or unemployment, we did a fantastic episode with Radhika Kapoor, who's a senior fellow at ICRIAR, and one of the best scholars you would have in India on employment issues, to understand what is happening to employment in India, exactly how to gauge it. There's a lot of debate between public sector, public data, the government data, the data from CMIE, and other sources, and how to sort of evaluate that data. No data is necessarily wrong, but you have to understand how to appreciate that data. And she explains that. And then she gives you an understanding of what is happening to India's employment trends, what to look in those trends, what are the worrisome parts, what is the policy requirement, what should you expect the government to do. And then we had a very, very special episode and must watch that we did with Professor Jaiti Ghosh on the involvement of women in India's economy. Now, this is something that very few people understand, and there's another episode, we'll give a link to that also, where we talked to Professor K.S. James of the Institute of Population Studies, where we talked about demographic dividend. And he also said this, that the demographic dividend that for India that we talk about will essentially happen if Indian women join the workforce. And so we talked to Jaiti Ghosh also to understand why is that number of Indian women in the workforce so low, and why is it even falling, and what are the different ways to understand that. Now, apart from hardcore economic issues and then social welfare issues, we also looked at many of the other aspects that typically don't either get counted as economic issues or were not part of Indian economy. For example, the unfortunate death of Cyrus Mistry really brought the issue of road safety, car safety into a sharp focus. We did an episode with Professor Kavi Bhalla of the University of Chicago to understand this whole issue of road safety. Why is it that in India safety doesn't sell, or why are we lax on issues of safety? How did other countries manage this? Did they also go through a phase when there were many accidents, high profile deaths? And what is the economics of this? Why is it that some people feel that putting more safety equipment in cars or would raise costs of car, and that will sort of derail the economics of that market? Also, what we understood by talking to Professor Bhalla was to understand that road safety is not just about car safety. There are other things, how are roads made, whether driver education is there, income levels, do they matter, all of that. So that episode will actually tell you a lot about it. The other big debate, as many of you might have heard and read about in newspapers, was the pensions debate. This whole very politicized slugfest between BJP and Congress about Congress wanting to go back to the old pension scheme and BJP wanting the new pension scheme, and it became a political war. But what was the economic principles behind it? And we did a fantastic detailed episode with Professor Mukesh Anand of NIPFP, and I really again urge you to watch it, because he explained that how this debate actually is totally centered on government employees, and those are maybe maximum 15% or 13% of the total workers. The harsh truth is that 85% of India's workers do not have any pension schemes, and how he explains it very well, how government's focus should be to sort of first provide pensions for the poorest and people who do not have as much support from their jobs, especially government jobs. So you must watch that episode to properly understand this whole pensions debate in the right context, and not sort of get sidelined by the politics of it. Similarly, we did a very detailed interview with Professor Adam Tooze, who's one of the leading thinkers in the world, and we asked him about the UK crisis. As some of you might know, that United Kingdom actually went through a massive economic crisis after a mini budget was presented, and that led to the Prime Minister at that time, Liz Truss, and the Chancellor to the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng, being removed from office, and now we have the third Prime Minister in UK in 2022. And that interview will explain exactly why that economic crisis became a political crisis, and what triggered the economic crisis. It gave you a good understanding of what happened internationally. So that was 2022, the first year when we had the Express Economist. I would, on behalf of the whole team that's producing this show, would want you to tell us how you liked the episodes, whether they helped you improve your understanding about the Indian economy. What would you like us to do more? Any questions you have, any specific people you want us to talk to, and wanted to assure you that in 2023 we are going to come up with another list of stellar economists talking about the Indian economy. It's a very crucial year for India and India's economy. If we have to sort of go beyond the whole debate about whether we are out of the COVID ditch that was created, and it's going to be a tough year because of the economic situation globally. There's sort of a slowdown and a recession. So look forward to interacting with you. Tell us what would you like to watch more. Keep sending us your feedback. My email ID will also be there, so you can write to me directly. And look forward to catching up with you in the new year 2023. Have a great year ahead.